You're listening to the Wedding Biz Network, the voice of the creative entrepreneur. Hey everyone, it's Andy Kushner, host of The Wedding Biz, and I am excited this week because I signed up for Clubhouse. And that might not sound so unusual to many of you, but I am usually behind the ball when it comes to taking on some kind of new something, technology, app, whatever. But I am diving in, and I had a wonderful welcome party that Morgan Childs hosted for me, and had a lot of really cool people come to it and had a blast. And I started a new club called The Wedding Biz. And so would love for you to follow me on Clubhouse and also to follow the Wedding Biz Club, because every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I have a special guest on and also invite audience members up and just have a real good time. So be sure to check all that out. So if you missed last week's episode, it was with Richard Eagleton, CEO of McQueen's Flowers, the internationally renowned luxury floral design brand and flower school with customers throughout the world. Wonderful, wonderful conversation. And this week, I have Bentley Meeker. Bentley is a New York City-based contemporary artist and lighting designer. He is the president of his own company, Bentley Meeker Lighting and Staging, Inc., specializing in lighting, audio, video, staging, and rigging. And just a brief listing of notable clients include White House state dinners, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Claudia Schiffer, Eddie Murphy, Heidi Klum, Martha Stewart, and the Sex and the City cast. And a very short example of musical acts he's worked with include Beyonce, Jay-Z, Aerosmith, Aretha Franklin, Billy Joel, Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen, David Bowie, The Eagles, Earth, Wind & Fire, Prince, and Green Day. That's a short sampling. And a sampling of corporate clients include O Magazine, Cartier, Versace, Victoria's Secret, Goldman Sachs, and the New York Philharmonic. He's had an enormous amount of press coverage. Bentley has also done several exhibitions, including more than one for the Whitney Museum of American Art and at Burning Man, and has put up shows in multiple galleries in Chelsea and Soho, New York City. Get ready for a discussion about light that I guarantee you have never heard before. Enjoy my conversation with Bentley Meeker. Bentley, I really appreciate you coming on the show. And, you know, it's interesting, in your website, you write that you and your team are first and foremost designers, and that light creates the environment creates the mood creates the experience. I mean, it's simply said, but it's really so much more complex, isn't it?
I just think that really what we're trying to get people to get is how underutilized light is. And I think that, you know, what we were really trying to get, even though we're an event lighting company, we were really trying to get everybody to get how underutilized light is in life. Basically, the sort of premise of what we do is based on what we believe light is in the world. And then the company, because we came up as an event company, you know, we translate that back into what we believe light in events would be, and then how that pertains to sort of a broader perspective on light in life. And the reason why I personally got to that perspective is because doing events, you kind of get to do whatever you want. You know what I mean? Like, you can really come up with ideas, you can create, you run them by people accept your ideas, and then all of a sudden you're off to the races doing some experimental cool shit or whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I came up through my entire career in this industry doing that for probably about the first 20 years until I settled on an art set that I really felt was the highest and best use of light in an event setting. And then, you know, your peripheral vision around an event is life. You know what I mean? And so then the question became, well, why is there a partition? Why isn't there sort of a bleed through between what happens in events and what happens in life, and how light affects you in your home versus how it affects you at your party, how it affects you in your automobile, how it affects you when you're, you know, in Maui.
It's interesting the way you're talking about light. I mean, I know that as a layman, people don't really think about light. I mean, obviously, there's the lighting in our house. You know, I mean, how many people are even really thinking about is it halogen? Is it What kind of light is it? What should they have? What is the wattage? Where should it be placed? It's almost, for most people, I would think it's secondary. And then on the other hand, you come to an event like one that you're involved in, that you've designed, or for me, in my case, I love music. So my first, let's call it acknowledgement that light is far more than what I thought it was through concerts. That's how I personally started to see light in a very different way, and I know that there's really, it's an art. It is absolutely an art.
I think you're 100% right that it is an art. And I think that those guys, the rock and roll guys, are some of the most creative guys on earth, I would say, in any medium, let alone lighting. But I think that, when you were talking about like that everything, that utilizing placement of lights and what kind of lights was secondary, I would think that that's tertiary. And I'll tell you why. Because your primary relationship to light is visibility. Okay. And almost uniformly, your secondary relationship to light is going to be about energy efficiency.
Okay.
Right. So here's the thing. You're not going to go for that halogen light bulb necessarily. Now, there are certain people that do. There are people that have the distinctions, and then I would say that the lion's share of the population don't. So, I don't think this necessarily applies to, our friends in the event industry, because I think there's a higher, more elevated sense of understanding of light and, the art around it. But I think that, people will sacrifice the regular incandescent light bulb, which is a stunningly beautiful light, in exchange for an LED light bulb, which is, a quarter or a third of the cost to operate, and the lamp life is longer. So you don't have to think about it and change it and go find it, and that's become the prevalent relationship that people have to light, so much that it's become very difficult to find incandescent light bulbs now. You know what I mean? So, that's embarrassing to say, but, I was talking to David Mon, who told me he has a warehouse full of light bulbs. And I was like, I'm going to go get myself a warehouse full of light bulbs. And I want myself a warehouse full of light bulbs.
Yeah. By the way, David was on the show twice. You know this. David really gets light. That guy has a relationship with light like no planner designer yet that I've really heard, the way he talks about it and understands it.
It's very interesting because David's actually informed some of my perspectives around light. Just through conversations that we've had on projects together. And, and the irony is that he himself is actually not, say a lighting designer per se, although
right.
I would probably question that fact because he's pretty brilliant with it.
Yeah. And you know how he loves candlelight,
And again, so, you've got to sort of going back to the sort of broader perspective, rather than the event perspective. And then we'll tie this all back.
Sure.
In a very sort of not super neat way, but it'll certainly it'll work. The way that light has affected us since the beginning of humanity has been really in two ways. Largely through the red frequencies, which are firelight. And then through, a combination of the red, blues, and then, sort of the amalgam of which is like high noon daylight, which is really the best kind of white light that you can get. So what you've really got is you've got daylight and you've got firelight, which are the two forms of light that we evolved under as a species. Okay?
Okay.
Now, when you compare incandescent light and you compare firelight, you have some pretty broad similarities between those two types of light. The meat of them are the same. The peas are carrots on one and they're peas on the other. You know what I mean? But, the meat of it is the same. The potatoes are basically the same, and then the garnishes are different. One's got cilantro and one's got parsley. Not that cilantro and meat and potatoes is the way to go, but I'm making so what we kind of figured out on our end is that, okay, so you've got incandescent light and firelight that are very similar. You've got daylight, which is full spectrum light, which has 16.8 million colors, according to the science surrounding us, that are contributing to that white light. Okay, so what you've got is you've got basically all the way up through probably, I would say until, say, post-World War II, when you saw the proliferation, like the real societal proliferation of fluorescent light. What you basically had was you had light. Even through electricity, you had light that was very similar to the light that we had experienced all through time and all through humanity.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Fluorescent light now all of a sudden started to take huge slivers of that spectrum out. So you had the remaining visibility because it was white light, they would amplify certain elements of the spectrum and take lots of it out. And then what you had was there's a connective relationship that we have, as humans, have to light. It's latent, it's innate. We're not particularly aware of it in our day-to-day light activities. But you know what? If somebody spent a day under fluorescent lights and they hadn't worked under fluorescent lights every day, they would really notice a marked difference in the way they feel, whether they attribute it to the light source or not. And so what we started really coming up with on our end is that we started to have, around the 1950s, light sources that had all of the visibility, but we're starting to really, truly lack in the connectivity. You know what I'm saying?
Now, say that again.
We had basically light that gave us all of the visibility. Okay, so we could see in fluorescent light the same way that we see under daylight. But from a soulful point, you don't connect to fluorescent light the same way you connect to daylight.
Yeah, I hate it. I totally hate that.
But you don't know why.
That's right.
The reason why is because from an evolutionary standpoint, you are now in light that is giving you visibility, but is actually removing connectivity.
Interesting.
Okay. And then therein lies a space between the visibility and the connectivity that has never been there before. And we don't know how to bridge it. And so, I've started working with art and creating art because, I really want to explore that space, the space between connectivity and visibility.
Interesting.
So now cut to 70 years later, 50 years later, what you're starting to see is a huge proliferation of LEDs. So now what you've got fluorescent lights in the office, which are your dominant light source in a commercial setting. And now what you're doing is you're taking your incandescent light, which at least you're familiar with, and from a soulful connective standpoint, you're familiar with in the same way that we were always familiar with firelight as we were a species growing into our own. You see what I mean? Now you've taken that away and you've replaced that with LEDs, which take even less of the spectrum and amplify it. You again create visibility and energy efficiency, but have now even less connectivity than light has typically and historically had. So the way that this ties back to events and weddings in particular, I'll tell you why this is important, is because here's the thing. In my house here, what I'll do is I have incandescent light everywhere in my house.
Okay.
But in my stairwell, where I'm spending seconds, maybe half a minute, I'll use LEDs. In my laundry room, where I'll go downstairs for like 5 minutes, I will have LED light because it's not somewhere where my soul is actually going to have time to actually situate and start to absorb the surroundings in a material way.
Wow, interesting.
So the idea when you start coming into spaces, but if it's somewhere in my house where I'll spend 20 minutes, that's an incandescent light.
Okay.
If it's somewhere in my house where I'm going to be spending, it's during the pandemic all day, all I can say is thank God my spirit was so much better. I think that a lot of my friends, because I was under light that I knew that made me feel good rather than light that actually made me feel like there was this chasm between connectivity and visibility.
Interesting. And it's obviously so subtle in terms of awareness.
Subtle in the moment, but the cumulative effect is not subtle at all. You see what I mean? You start looking at people, and it would have been an amazing experiment during quarantine, and I didn't even have, I wish I had thought of it, but I hadn't thought of it then. It would have been an amazing experiment to see how people actually felt about the pandemic under one kind of light versus another kind of light.
Jeez.
Now, here's the thing. So this was a thesis that was kind of like bubbling around in my head, and I was sort of exploring it and checking it out, and I was trying to figure out what it meant and da-da-da-da. And then I went to Burning Man. I got a project at Burning Man where, have you ever been to Burning Man?
I read about that. I'm dying to go. I just need a guide. I need someone to take me, tell me what to do.
I'll steward you through. I have no problems with that. So anyway, in 2011 and 2010, I went and, mind blown. You know what I mean? And then in 2011, they have this one central non-denominational sacred space called the temple.
Yeah, I've read about that. Yeah.
So in 2011, I was asked to design the lighting for the temple for the first time.
Jeez, wow.
So they were, pressuring me because, budgets were concerns and so on and so forth. Electricity is obviously a concern. There's nothing out there, fuel for the generators, the amount of wiring, the amount of work you're going to have to do. So we wind up designing this, and we're asked to use LEDs. And I really fought hard, and I actually got them to let me use halogen light. I had to kick in, some financially to make that feasible. But I thought, this is okay. Here's a 70,000 person experiment,
right,
to be able to actually see how people react, because everything on the playa was LED by 2011. So how do we get a juxtaposition of light sources to see how people react with different kinds of light sources? So we lit it with halogen, and the head of Burning Man came to me and said that they had never had that many people go to the temple at night in the history of the event.
Huh?
Yeah, it was like, and they said it was by a factor of multiples, not by a factor of increments.
Interesting.
And so, that led me to sort of have a broader understanding that now what we're talking about is that we're talking about that people really genuinely react differently to different sources of light that they see. Okay, so that, and again, like I said, that informed an art career where I'm diving into the exploration of why that is. And then what happens is that bleeds right back into the event company. What happens is that sometimes what I feel is that things in the world have technological advancements that exceed their artistic viability or exceed their usefulness. You know what I mean? So I'll give you a classic example. For email and text, BlackBerry was king.
Right, I remember.
BlackBerry was king. It just was. It was easy to use. It was intuitive. I got 4 times. I'm on an Android now. It was 4 times as fast for me to get things done on a BlackBerry, and I held on to my BlackBerry right up until the IT company would not run the servers. You know what I mean? Which was about, honestly, I was embarrassed to say, it was about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
Don't get me wrong. I had a smartphone to do all the apps, and I had everything to do with smartphone. But when it came down to email and when it came down to text, you know what? I could write a nice long email with punctuated, capitalized everything, beautiful email, and honoring the English language the way that I was taught to in the Bahamas.
Right.
But the thing is that sometimes what I found that technology in the event sector can transcend its artistic viability. And then what happens is that you start going forward in a way and going backward in another way. And so that becomes kind of a tightrope that we're quite interested in finding a way to walk. And so the way that we've translated it into weddings is that we'll utilize LEDs for certain things. We'll light things with LEDs. So if we're lighting a wall or we're lighting trees or something like that out in the yard, we'll use LEDs. We will not put people in LEDs. So what we want light that people are under to be light that they recognize from a soulful standpoint. And that is older technology, but higher art. And so what we found is that that works actually very well. And, probably around 2012, 2013, 2014, people were telling me how much better my lighting had gotten. And they were asking me what I was doing differently. And I was getting those calls all the time. You know what I mean? Those conversations were happening a few a month. And we would always say the same thing, nothing. Once you achieve a certain zenith of activity to light, we weren't about to undermine that with technology.
Okay.
Now, that's not to say that there aren't certain instances where you have to use LEDs, and, battery-powered LEDs are phenomenal. You know what I mean? And then, you get wrestled into certain budgetary constraints and so on and so forth, and you work with that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, even if I have to raise it out of my own pocket, I have a cardinal rule that if somebody's going to be sitting in a space for more than 20 minutes, we are going to utilize incandescent light on that person because they are going to feel better and feel different. And it's going to matter in a different kind of way. And especially for a wedding, when you're actually in a situation where you're related or you're a friend and this is a special day and a special moment, the latent sort of niggling feeling of discomfort that happens under the wrong kind of light is something that we were very in tune with and very cognizant about eliminating from our events. That's how we've done that, and that's why we've done that.
Yeah, I read, somewhere also you said, and I'm starting to get it more, the way, you're framing it, is that how light affects us at, as you said, the physiological level and at the spiritual level.
Yes. Exactly. And so basically, what you heard was a very sloppy summation of what that is.
No. So in terms of for events, I mean, in terms of your process, Bentley, when you're designing, whether it's for a wedding or it's maybe to support a brand, what is the process like typically? What is that like for you?
On a personal level, really what I do is I come up more for, company wide, because we have a litany of designers working with us now who are freaking phenomenal, and even through COVID, they've been absolutely outstanding in every way. Our process typically is that we interact usually with the designer. Sometimes it'll be the end client. And what we'll do is we'll have a conversation with the designer or the designer and the client about what we want it to look like, what they want it to look like, what they want it to feel like. And the conversations that we have a lot are sort of centered around feeling.
Can you be specific? Well, maybe in a minute you can give me an example.
I don't really have concrete examples of that, because they're just, I can give you a hypothetical example, but it would be like that.
But it's like people describing the emotion that they want to feel, and going from one part of the event to another part of the event. I mean, I imagine event designers are talking in those terms with you. We want people to feel, whatever, some kind of excited energy. They're getting ready to go to dancing or there's going to be some kind of product reveal, something like that.
Some people really do. Some people understand the technology well enough to start having a conversation about what technology they want to use. And then it's incumbent on us to go back and say, okay, so what's our objective with the technology? What are we trying to accomplish? And how do we want the sensibility to be in space? Those are oftentimes conversations that my designers and clients will have. A lot of clients, especially in New York City, a lot of designers, especially, we have a shorthand with. We know what they want. We know what they like. We know how to work with them. We know how to service them and help them articulate their vision. Because remember that lighting, as much as lighting may really be like 90% of the mood, 95% of the mood, it's still an addendum to a broader vision. So the idea of how we want people to feel, largely rests with us. Because what we have to do is we have to translate that to support a broader vision for the design of the event overall.
During the event, I'm assuming that during that, there's a certain amount of programming that you do, obviously ahead of time. How much of it then is flexible where in the moment during the event, do you have your your lighting designer making adjustments and going, based on what happens in the moment at the event?
Oh, there's tons of shit on the fly.
Yeah. I imagine that's the art. That's the art, right?
Yeah, I mean, weddings especially, it's like all of a sudden, grandma's in the bathroom, so she's not doing the speech, so let's do the horror. She'll come back and do the speech afterwards.
Right.
These happen all the time. I mean, listen, I admire these planners like nobody's business because I see what they deal with on a day in and day out basis.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's just impressive. It's like, okay, this is happening. This has changed. That's different. Let's do this. And it all has to be seamless. It all has to look like it flows. You know what I mean? Even though it's like the last thing in the world it's doing is actually flowing. And then, with their know-how and their ability to massage it, it flows. So what we have to do is we have to be able to fly with that.
How about the relationship between lighting and audio? I mean, I know you also handle audio, but the relationship between the two.
Lighting and audio, here's what I'll say about that. And this is probably the most succinct way that I could put it. It's amazing how shitty the lighting looks when the sound sucks.
Interesting. Okay.
So, part of the reason why we got into audio was because we were kind of like loosely in audio and not doing a great job with it. And then we thought to ourselves, it's like, wow, you know what? It's like, it's we didn't get props for the lighting and get pilloried for the audio. It's just, you're just dead in the water with all of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we really, about 10 years ago, we just went in there and we just took the plunge. It was a multi-million-dollar plunge. But it was the right thing because now what we did was we wound up putting great audio together. So now we're not beholden to other people's audio, which is really great because now we can control the audio and we know that we're controlling it at the highest level. And when the audio is amazing, it's amazing how much better the light looks. I don't even know how to tell you, it's just, and so having control of all of the elements and bringing all of the elements to the highest level of quality that could possibly be brought. For us was really an objective, and it worked very well. You know what I mean? It solved a lot of problems that we were sort of having just at the political level.
And what about when you bring video into this too?
That's a different story. Video is a whole different ballgame. The reason why we got into video was because we didn't have control over the ambient light that was reflecting from screens and LED screens.
Huh.
And so we really had no desire to go into video per se.
Yeah.
But we were on a project, and a co-vendor who will remain nameless had a big white screen with a logo on it, and we had asked them if they could take the intensity of the screen down. The operator took a look at us, and he was like, "You know what? Screw you. I don't work for you. No." And I looked at him. I was like, "Thank you for putting me in the video business."
Wow.
And so that's how we got into the video business. And the reason why is because, and that was a magical job. It was a beautifully crafted environment of blue light. And we had been asked to bring a magical blue environment. And we had done it before. We'd done it actually in that room at the Melissa Rivers wedding.
Okay.
And what happened is that we wound up crafting a very similarly, subtle and, magical environment where it's like things would unfold. You'd turn a corner and all of a sudden it's like it just had a magic to it that was unparalleled. And then they put the video on and it wiped the whole thing out.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, it wiped the whole thing out, and we had no control over it. There was nothing we could do. I called the owners of the company. I couldn't get through to them in time, and the client walks in, they take a look at it, and like, "Where's the magic?" I was like, "It's under the white light." and there was nothing I could do. Just sit there and be heartbroken a little bit.
Oh, geez.
And so for us, it was like, okay, look, we have to be able to control this element of the event. So the subtle blending and the spaces between lighting, video, and audio are something that I think that we've been able to really fill in a very smooth and cohesive way by having a multiple disciplinary company here now. And, the revenue's nice and that's all fine and dandy. But really what it is that, we spend a lot of time crafting environments with light. We don't want them to get trashed by the video.
What about musical artists where you've got all of it? Look, it's important at every event, but especially concerts, stuff like that. I mean, my God, the audio, the video, behind it, the lighting. I read you've worked with Paul McCartney, Prince, Beyonce. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me about that? Was that at events or you dealt with concerts, like at concert venues?
What we typically do is we will do concerts in conjunction with events. So we won't do Madison Square Garden for, Beyonce's tour.
Yeah.
But we'll do Beyonce at a venue for, it could be a private event. It could be a corporate event. You name the client. And we've worked with just about all of them.
Yeah, that must be such a blast for you.
It's a lot of fun. And what's really a lot of fun is that we do work with other lighting designers. You know what I mean? So what happens is that we get a fresh perspective on venues that we know very well. A lot of these guys are breezing through and, they're maybe in between Toledo and Portland, Maine, you know what I mean? And they're stopping to do a club date in New York, and we're the club date. And so what will happen is that their lighting designer will come in because he's on the tour with them. He'll, spec a certain lighting rig out in a particular way. We'll execute it for them. And typically in those instances, now oftentimes they'll hand the design over to us and ask us to design it ourselves. And oftentimes they'll come with their own lighting designers and they'll do it themselves. And then what we'll do is we'll execute. And the beauty is that we get to see somebody else's fresh perspective on how to do that.
Yeah.
And so that makes us better designers, and it makes us, it gives us a whole different perspective on things that just makes us better, and it's interesting and it's fascinating. And, you meet some really cool people that you stay in touch with.
I want to be sure you know the wonderful news of our latest show, Stop and Smell the Roses, with acclaimed lifestyle and event design expert Preston Bailey. Not only will he share the secrets, tools, and technologies behind his extraordinary ability to create a theatrical environment out of any space, you will also discover more about the man behind the magic. Preston will reveal how his focus on personal growth has been the root of his professional success, and you'll have the opportunity for him to answer your questions along the way. Plus, Preston will be inviting onto the show many of the star celebrities he has worked with in the past, so you don't want to miss a single episode. We also have another great show on the Wedding Biz Network, The Business of Being Creative, with host Sean Lowe. Since debuting last May, his show has really taken off, and he's continuing to bring you the creative business advice he's shared with accomplished industry notables. Be sure to take advantage of Sean's talkback opportunity by recording questions and comments from right there in each episode's show notes. So, if you are a creative who is turning your craft into a business or want to take it to another level, head to theweddingbiznetwork.com and take a listen to Stop and Smell the Roses with Preston Bailey and The Business of Being Creative with Sean Lowe. That's theweddingbiznetwork.com. I want to step back for a minute because I'm also really curious about how you came to get to all of this. Like I read a couple things. There were a little conflict with each other, so I'm not real clear that you were either a high school dropout and came to New York at 14, or I'm not clear you got kicked out of college. And it's, I mean, I guess you have it as public information. So out of college, out of rehab, out of your parents' house, like which is, or is it all of the above?
It's complicated, but I'll lay it out for you. So I got kicked out of high school when I was 14 years old.
Why?
Can
you say?
I think the statute of limitations is running out.
Okay, I'll let it go. All right. All right. But you got kicked out at 14. Okay, so you're like 8th grade or something like that, or 9th grade.
I got kicked out of the 7th grade, the 8th grade, the 9th grade. My parents put me in boarding school in the 10th grade, and they're like, if you get kicked out, you can't come back to live with us. At the time, my mom and stepfather were living in Canada.
Okay.
So they're like, you can't come back here if you get kicked out. So 2 months later, of course, I got kicked out. My father was just about to move to New York in about 2 or 3 weeks. And I knew that he was moving to New York. So I was like, I'm coming to New York, whether you're there or not, bro.
Yeah.
My father comes to New York. I wound up living with him. And then for 6 months, I got a job working for a photographer because I wasn't in school. So I was 14 years old. So I started working for a photographer named Peter Vaith down on 41st Street and Madison Avenue.
And let's be clear, this is a major photographer.
Oh, he was the real deal. At the time, he was one of the largest commercial photographers in the industry.
What was it that you were doing for just assisting, or?
He was basically assisting, a little bit more lighting centric. So I was setting up a lot of umbrellas and, the batteries and the flash packs and stuff like that. And then, I'd be traipsing around, Spanish Harlem looking for tables and chairs for a good price. I mean, it was everything. But it really gave me a good sort of window into production at that level, even though it was still production rather than it was film production. It was still very similar, I think, in nature. Then 6 months after I got to New York, went to rehab, and I spent 16 months upstate in rehab up there at Daytop Village. And then I came back down. I did 6 months of reentry, which was basically, I think, 8 to 5 every day. Up on 83rd Street in Columbus, which, by the way, is not your swanky 83rd in Columbus now.
Okay, I'll bet.
Wild back then.
Yeah.
And then I started doing 2 groups a night. So I went in and I took a year at Hunter College. And then the rehab decided that they didn't like the way my treatment was going, and they wanted to send me back upstate. I told them, I said, listen. I think I was 17, as 18 years old. I was like, I'm not going back upstate, guys. It's just not going to happen. And they're like, you can't stay here. And if you can't stay here, then you can't live with your father. So, and my father was like, I'm sorry, if you leave rehab, you got to leave here too. So I left rehab, college, and my father's house all on the same day.
Oh my God. And you're how old at this point?
I was 18.
Okay.
But I did have a lovely 31-year-old French Algerian woman who decided she was going to take me in and make me her little pet project. So it was a pretty soft landing in the world.
This is like every 18, 19-year-old's dream.
It was a dream. It was really kind of a dream. It kind of right. So that turned into, that had a shelf life, of course. And then I wound up moving to Williamsburg on the south side. And I lived there for about 3 years, and sort of like got my career started. So coming out of there, I remember the day that I got kicked out of college, I walked into the theater just to see what was going on, and I was like sort of trying to take stock. And it was literally like I got kicked out, and then I was like, okay, I'm going into the theater to like collect my thoughts. I know it's going to be a big, open, quiet space. I'm going to be able to collect my thoughts and figure out like what the fuck am I going to do with my life?
Right.
And I look up and there's a bunch of technicians hanging Licos.
Okay.
And I walked over and I was like, do you guys need a hand? Like, can I get some work here? And they gave me a little job. I started talking to the freelancers, and then they recommended me to a company out in Long Island City, C Factor, which was a rock and roll lighting company at the time. So all of a sudden, I had a job. And I was starting to work, and it was like, and I was in the business, and I was hanging lights. I mean, I remember one of the earliest shows that we did. We prepped in the shop the lighting rig for Run DMC and Aerosmith, Walk This Way.
Yeah.
and it was hilarious. I look at that rig now and I'm just like, man, that was so long ago.
Jeez.
But, it was kind of a fascinating moment. And then from there, I turned it into, I had two careers running simultaneously. I was working in film, and I'd actually gotten myself into the film union. There were two film unions at the time. There was IATSE, and then there was also NABIT, which is National Association of Broadcast Employees and Technicians. And IATSE is International Alliance of Theatrical Stagehands. So what happened is that I get into NABIT, and then NABIT and IATSE wound up merging, and so I got an IATSE union card to be able to work on films. I actually still have it, and I've never come closer to using it than this year. And then at the same time, I was working theatrical projects. I worked at the Roundabout when they were on 17th Street. I worked at the Palladium. That was one of my earliest jobs, was working at the Palladium.
And let's make sure people know who are listening. Like, that was a massive nightclub. I think the former owners of Studio 54 started that. I mean, that was a big deal.
And it was everything that Studio 54 was.
Yeah.
Bigger. I mean, literally, like, you'd be standing there, we'd be up on a ladder, there'd be two or three of us lighting guys, Andy Warhol would be directing it, Keith Haring and then Jean-Michel Basquiat would be painting the backdrop, and Andy would be, directing the lighting and directing the painting and directing the set.
Jeez.
And it was just, and nobody was then who they are now. So it was kind of like, the thing that really drives me nuts is that I probably could have just walked with those backdrops. And it said we just threw them in the trash.
Oh my God.
What would a Basquiat Haring generation backdrop with Andy Warhol's input?
Crazy. Maybe somebody does have it.
You know what? You may be right. I'll tell you. I read an article. It's actually really funny. Ian said that somebody asked him. I said, "What's the one regret that you have in your life?" And he said, "I tried to impress a girl, so I gave her one of my Basquiats."
Oh,
yeah, like 30 years ago.
Oh my God!
It's like he's like, I could buy one of my development projects for that now.
Yeah, I hope he got the girl at least. Jeez,
I never got the story, but I trust Ian.
That's crazy. So I mean, God, Bentley, you've come. I mean, it's just, you have come so far. I mean, from what you just described to me to where you are now, what is the hardest part of what you do? Like, what do you still struggle with now?
The number one thing that I think is difficult for us is that we're always fighting off the desire that people have in the event world to choose technical wizardry over beauty. And I think that's a really tough pill to swallow. We can do the razzle dazzle, flash and trash, LED everything, and sometimes when we have to, we absolutely will. But there's a certain elegance that gets lost with that. There's a certain beauty. There's a certain amount of I don't have a better word for it. There's like a stunningness that you don't get anymore. It's the same thing when you would walk in and you'd like go into Saks Fifth Avenue and you'd put an Armani suit on and you'd feel the fabric and you'd look at the buttons and you'd check the seams and you would be like, this is a stunning suit.
Right.
You know what I mean? And now you do that shit online. You don't know what you get.
That's right. And people don't seem to care as much. That's what bothers me the most.
Exactly. And I think that is probably the number one thing that we're fighting, because I really instill in my people that that's a really important element of what we do and who we are. And it's always been who I am. And it's difficult because it's like, we have to do certain things for commercial viability. And I understand that, you know what I mean? And there's always sort of like push-pull of the two. But what I wish is that there would be more interest in creating a subtle, unfolding, elegant, beautiful, magical environment than there would be to creating something that somebody's going to talk about tomorrow, something that the press is going to pick up or that will get social media hits. You know what I mean? And I think that what happens is that there's a part of the world that gets lost. You know what I mean? And it's like, and who knows? Maybe it's the right thing. It's I don't know. I mean, it's like nobody looks at a horse and buggy and says that should have been that way. But with light is very different because daylight hasn't changed, firelight hasn't changed.
Yeah.
The evolution of humanity has not changed yet. And so what we're playing with something very different than the feel of a seam or the touch of a fabric or the quality of a button or the wheels on a horse and buggy, you know what I mean? Or the tires on an automotive vehicle. you're playing with something that I think is the very essence of who we are, which is light. When you look at every religion, you look at every, theological dissemination about light, and it's all about who we are. Your soul is light. Where do you go? You go into the big white light. We're playing with something different. And here's the thing is that the technology that's coming out in the world might be making other technology obsolete, but the light is not changing in the world. And that light is very, very important to who we are as a physiological being and who we are as a spiritual being. And so that right there is what I'm fighting for the most. And that those technological innovations and advancements are what I'm fighting against the most in certain instances.
Interesting. I was going to ask you about that with technology where, obviously there's, gain from it, but at the same time, with the artistic element, I wonder how it integrates or not always integrates.
I think at the end of the day, there's a certain higher level relationship that humans have to light. So it's not really a taste thing. It's just a higher level of a relationship that we have to light. It's very subtle. You know what I mean? And you can hear conversations about people talking about the subtle body and how the subtle body relates to light and so on and so forth. And, when you start diving into the actual molecular and atomic, makeup of who we are, you'll start to find light inside cells. You know what I mean? So there actually is a physiological makeup that we have that is light. And so what happens is that hasn't changed. That's not going to change. You know what I mean? And there's a relationship there to the exterior light and the interior light. There's a relationship there between, and then ultimately the way that it translates is that it translates into how you feel. You see what I mean? So
right.
It translates into, so if, like I said, if you're walking through a space, no problem. LEDs all day long. Love them. Great. Fabulous. Perfect. Easy. Beautiful. Great. Done. Can make it sexy as fuck. It's great. But if you're in the light for an appreciable amount of time, that has to be a different kind of light, or there's going to be an element of discomfort. You don't know if you go home and fight with your wife because you don't know why. You don't know why you're frustrated. Are you driving more aggressively? Are you reaching for the ice cream when you get home? Do you want to be reaching for the ice cream when you get home? And how much of that could be attributed to the level of latent discomfort that you had in a space that you were in because the lighting was different? But let's take this out of an event setting for a moment.
Okay.
You're in the Pentagon. You're in the basement. Okay. And you're approving bomb missions in Afghanistan.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Okay. So you're sitting there. It's 4:45 on a Friday and a mission comes in and needs to be approved. Okay. You've been under these fluorescent lights all week. You want to get the fuck out of there. The smart bomb is going to cost $2 million, but it's going to take out the building. Okay. Some bomb's going to cost $200,000. It's an easy approval. It's $200,000. You got authority to do that yourself. But it's going to take out the block.
Okay.
You see what I mean? What do you want to do? You want to get the hell out of there because you've been under the shitty light all week, right?
Right.
You want to get out of there. So what are you going to do? Are you going to sit there? Are you actually going to sit in your office and wait until 7, 8 o'clock at night until, senior Pentagon officials approve this, or whether the political appointees approve this, or are you just going to approve the $200,000 and go?
Listen, this is a heavy way you're describing this, but it's probably quite real. I'm sure this happens.
Let's take it to a little more of an arcane kind of a hypothesis. What if you're approving claims for a hurricane or a natural disaster? You can sit there and you have a certain approval authority, and you're under these lights that suck. And it's like you can either just process this claim and send it out, and you can get more done, and you can get the hell out of there, and you meet your quota, or you can do them right. If you're in light that makes you feel better, you're going to be more inclined to do the latter, where you're actually going to be taking a look at these claims, and you're going to be looking more closely. You're going to be exploring what's possible and what's not possible in terms of getting, approvals from higher ups. And you're going to be in your environment in a different kind of a way. And you're going to be relating to people and your environment differently because of the light that you have.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that.
And that's countless. I mean, how much inefficiency is lost in offices and businesses all the way around? Because you know what? It's 5 o'clock. I'm fucking out of here. How much of that happens in the world where it's like if you waited until 5:30, how much more efficiency would be realized in the world because people would do things differently, better?
I totally relate to this. I used to work for IBM and Lexmark, Fortune 500 company. And I remember, and I wanted to get out of that office as fucking fast as I could, and it was all fluorescent lighting.
Bingo.
And I was aware of it, even though I hadn't had this conversation. I knew that lighting drove me batshit crazy.
How much productivity do you think IBM loses because of that?
Yeah, and right.
I mean,
right.
Are we talking 100 million? Are we talking $1 billion? Are we talking 10 billion? What are we talking? Like, what are we talking? You know what I mean? And then what would have the electric bill been had those been a different sort of light?
Mm.
You know what I mean? What would it look? $1 million? 5 million? 7
Right. Invest a little more for quite a big return.
The logic just defies comprehension on my part. You know what I mean? But I also understand that people don't speak the language quite in the same way that we do. And it is very much its own language. You know what I mean? So I think that there's a real discourse there, not just in events, but in the world. You know what I mean? And then when we bring it back to events, it's a tough slog because people really are going for a very specific kind of a thing. And so we've got to deliver on that thing. And sometimes it's antithetical to what we're trying to do sort of in a broader sensibility standpoint. That's kind of like the biggest hurdle that we're in right now. And then what happens is that, we leave. I'm embarrassed to say it leaves us open a little bit. People can be like, hey, they're just doing old school stuff. It's like, no, man, no, there's a thesis here and we're executing on the thesis.
Well, Bentley, so many things. I guess for now, for this interview conversation, because I'd love to go do so much more with you. But just as, to wrap up, you've done so much. You've been through so much in your life. You've accomplished so much. What are you looking forward to? Like, what's next for you? Where do you want to, your vision going forward? What is it?
That is a fabulous question. One that, thank you, coronavirus, has allowed me to actually engage fully. And I am still very much at the inquisitive stage. Something that I feel like is a mission of mine in the world is going to be finding an effective way to get this conversation about light into the public discourse in a uniform way and in a widespread way. You know what I mean? It's like, what I've learned doing events and what I've learned how people behaviorally react under light has taught me so much about light that I think that the world needs to know. And I'm trying to figure out the best way to help them get to know it. And I feel like it transcends like even a business proposition. That part of the reason why I did it through art was because I think art is a much more powerful statement than anything that we could do business wise.
But then people don't really know what's going on behind and inside of it, though. Like they know they feel good being around your art, but they don't know why.
Well, again, like I said, it's an interesting dynamic because my art, I actually have an art career and independent of the lighting company, and that is largely centered around the juxtaposition of light sources, specifically to give people the ability to experience them side by side and experience themselves in those sources. So somehow, some way, before I die, I've got to get the world talking about light. And here's the thing: I don't need to have the answers. I just need to get the questions out.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of really smart people that are built to find the answers.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But none of them are asking the right question. That's what's next for me. And, events will definitely be a part of it. And, the other part of it is that events are my love. I mean, I came up in this world. I mean, this is my family. I mean, I'm sort of scrolling through all the people that you interviewed. I'm like, I love that guy. I love that girl. I love her. I love them. I love it's my family. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I can't leave my family. But at the same time, I've got to figure out how to get this out into the world in a broader way, because there really are claims adjusters and mission approvals that are getting fucked up because of the environment that these people are in.
Well, it sounds like maybe a book is one way for you to do it. Have you thought of that?
I've definitely thought about that. I've been talking to a guy right now. He's finishing up a book for a pretty big luminary right now that I'd prefer not to say because it'll be out soon. I don't want to steal his thunder. So we're having a conversation about that. But I don't know if I have the patience to do that, Andy.
I know it's a lot. Listen, I've done work on a book and it's just I just can't bring myself to finish it. It's a hard thing. I've heard a lot of some of the best authors, especially of nonfiction, say it's a bear. It's
a lot of work. It's a lot of research, but at the same time, I've definitely thought about it, and I'm definitely giving it a hard look because I think that I think it is an effective way to get the word out. I've always felt that art was a more effective way to get the world out because you channel something through art in a way that you don't channel through literature, and you channel something through in writing that you don't channel through art. So not that the two aren't, that writing's not art. So it's kind of something centered around that. And I think that, again, like I said, it's like the $200,000 bomb that takes out the entire block. How many people die in Afghanistan because people want to go home at night in Washington or in Arlington, Virginia? You know what I mean? And so how does that work? Like if we could have a distinction around light that was centered in the middle of all of that, how many lives would be saved? How many lives would be better? How many things would be done more efficiently that would have higher yields that would serve more people? And then, bringing that back into events, how many things can we do that would make people feel better and, feel happier? And what happens when two people are having a conversation about a multi-billion-dollar deal that they want to close at somebody's bar mitzvah, and there's light and sound that keeps on like batting them in the head, and they can't really get the conversation out, and the deal dies because it was a shitty conversation with this guy. No, it wasn't. It was a shitty environment that you were having the conversation.
Yeah, that's real stuff. That's real stuff.
Real stuff. And that's not anything that anybody's talking about. And that's what I need to be talking about. And if it works in events, it works in the world. And if it works in the world's got to know. David knows. David Beam knows. Preston knows. You know what I mean? But those are unique individuals. I'm talking about like the lady across the street who's walking to the supermarket. She's got to know.
Yeah. Well, geez, Bentley, I hate to cut this off here because I feel like we could go for – I'm going to have you on again.
Yeah, I've enjoyed the conversation too, and I hope I haven't monopolized it too much.
No. This is exactly what I want. Are you kidding? This is fascinating to me. Really fascinating.
Far out.
So thank you for doing this, man. Thank you for coming on.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed it, and I like what you're doing. I think what you're doing is great.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
You've gotten everybody in the industry on that. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, these are people who fascinate me, and I just hope that other people also enjoy it too. So thank you for saying that.
Fascinate me too, bro.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Bentley Meeker. Be sure to check out his website at bentleymeeker.com. And on Instagram, you can find him at Bentley Meeker, and on Facebook at bentley.meeker. All of this is in the show notes at our website of theweddingbiz.com. And if you enjoyed this, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And don't forget to listen to our follow-on segment that comes out each week on Wednesday called The Next Level, in which I have a guest co-host, and together we tease out some of the highlights of the interview, talk about them in a way that you can use to raise your own business to the next level. And this week's guest co-host is going to be Sean Lowe of The Business of Being Creative, who also has a podcast by the same name on the Wedding Biz Network. And next week, we have two special guests at the same time, Tara Fay and Bruce Russell, planners and designers out of Dublin and London, respectively. And they have also had a TV show and currently have an online company together. So be sure to subscribe to The Wedding Biz if you haven't already, and we'll catch you next week on The Wedding Biz.